So I had a thought that I think both of you will think is rather dark and not where your kind of heads are at. So I want you to tell me why I'm wrong, which is that on Tuesday there were a bunch of surprises. And in some ways those surprises were sort of ideal, I think, from a certain way of looking at it, from restraint, which is that the GOP holds the Senate, Joe Biden might become the president, the consensus will continue to discredit itself over the next 4 years, and then the people come out big for Josh Hawley or Tucker Carlson in 2024, especially given that the GOP has held the Senate. And of the nominees that Biden's going to be putting forward for cabinet offices, they're probably going to be more hawkish people. So from that point of view, why is it bad to kind of basically be okay with Joe Biden becoming president? Let's start with you, Michael.
I think in part, so your optimistic scenario is too optimistic. That is to say, first of all, Tucker Carlson will not run for president. I have no expectation that he will do that. Second of all, if you've watched the show the last couple of nights, and I'm friendly with him, but I've been kind of surprised and nervous in the tone that he's been taking the last couple nights. So I don't know the extent to which he's, his thinking has evolved over the last few days. I'm just saying I've seen a couple of signs. And third of all, I don't know that Josh Hawley is everything we would want him to be, or even you would want him to be. That is, assuming you and I, or the American conservative, and I have some differences, which I think we do. We have a lot more in common, but we still have some differences. I think he's probably a little closer to where I am than to you are, but he's also, you and I are probably closer to one another than either one of us is to him on these issues. And then the fourth reason is I just don't see how they lose in 2024, given uncontested power for 4 years and all the changes they're going to make to the system and things like that. I mean, what we're witnessing right now, I already wrote an article about this, so I may as well say it on the record on camera. It appears that we are witnessing serious voter fraud in a bunch of states simultaneously that is going unchecked. And you think if they do that, pull it off and get away with it, we're going to fight and have potentially win a fair election in 2024? I think that sounds ludicrous. A friend of mine put it this way to me on the phone. He said, you and I, meaning he and I, we went in Tuesday thinking Trump had a chance to win this fair election. But in hindsight, we look stupid, don't we? Because they've been saying since 2016, he's illegitimate. The Russians elected him. We have to impeach him. They've been running essentially a coup, an operation against him for 4 years, saying openly that any means are necessary to get the tyrant out of office. And yet, at age 50, I was still naive enough to believe, they won't go that far. He could still win this outright. They've told us all along they're going to do this, and now they're doing it. And I just don't see, if they can get away with it, how we'll have a shot in 2024 or any year thereafter.
Chris, would you like to weigh in on that?
Well, I don't know. Do I start with the amens or the hosannas? I share Michael's assessment that your outlook on this is like sort of that of a cockeyed optimist. I mean, there's sort of a disposition in a lot of conservative DNA that the best way to win is to lose. And it doesn't seem to have worked out very well so far, since we haven't won anything for a very long time and we're living among the ruins. There is, I guess I'm just going to underscore a lot of what Michael said. I mean, look, the delegitimation campaign started in 2015, and it started inside the Republican Party, which is as bankrupt as the Democrat Party. It is theoretically our best vehicle for carrying forward the ideas that we think would benefit the citizens of this country. But it hasn't shown any will to win. The only person who showed any will to win in the past 4 or 5 years is Donald Trump. And by the way, on Tuesday night or on Wednesday, where have, for instance, Mitch McConnell been with their expressions of support for the president, or their expressions maybe just of consternation at some of the apparent irregularities in the vote? It's Pennsylvania, it's Michigan, it's Wisconsin, it's now looks like it's Atlanta. And so when bad behavior, when manipulation, when lying, when cheating is not punished and in fact is rewarded, what makes anybody think it would stop? And, and I guess I'd follow that up when we think about like who runs in 2024. I mean, leaving aside some of the practical issues, which is after 4 years of Kamala Harris as president, why would we think that Josh Hawley is going to go and beat her? I mean, I think Josh Hawley is very good on a lot of scores, and I have a lot of respect for him. But he's not going to pull in the sort of crowds that Donald Trump did, right? I mean, there's a charismatic element to electoral politics that a lot of conservatives, particularly of the intellectual stripe, miss, and that's something that Trump understands very well. He can motivate his base. He can get a lot of people out there in a way that nobody else can.
And to follow up on that, Michael, since we're already on the subject of the election, which is still in the balance right now. Michael, you wrote probably one of the, I think it probably is the one or two most widely read pieces in this election cycle about the coming coup. Now that we're a couple of days after the election, how do you think your predictions are holding up?
I hate questions like that because what am I supposed to say? They're holding up pretty good, and then I sound like a megalomaniac. I said all along, look, they were talking about the use of force if necessary. Street protest, street fight if necessary, court challenges. But I also said that I think it's a staging game for them. Their preference is hopefully there is a blue wave and we can just win it outright and we don't have to do any of this, right? Second is if it's close, we use our control of the state legislatures and the voting process counting the way they've done in the past. Although to the best of my knowledge, not in a presidential election since 1960. There's an anecdote that Theodore White told, I think in the late 70s. So almost 2 decades after the event, of how Illinois was deliberately stolen by the Daley machine in Chicago. They tend not to do this in presidential elections because it just looks too bad. But they did it to Norm Coleman in 2008 in Minnesota. They did it to, I think his name was Foley in Connecticut, the governor's race. They did it to Scott Walker last year. There's a pattern of doing this. If it's close, use your control of the process to find ballots at the last second. Okay, and then voila, your guy magically wins. They've loosened up the harvesting laws, mail-in voting, all of this stuff throughout the year in order to prepare, if necessary, for a chaotic situation where their operatives on the ground can control what votes are found, what votes are discarded or not found, what votes are counted, and so on, right? And if they can't win in a blue wave, which they clearly didn't, use that. If that doesn't work, go to street protests. I think the reason we're not seeing street protests and the other stuff, and then stage 4 was, if necessary, use the military. They were literally saying this. I get attacked and called crazy all the time for quoting their own words back to them. They say, let's use the 82nd Airborne. I say, hey, they're talking about using the 82nd Airborne. Wouldn't that be a coup? There goes crazy conspiracy theorist on a coup. It's it's a kind of, I hate to use the phrase Orwellian, but we're in this new environment where to cite the same fact pattern is either legitimate or illegitimate, not based on the facts themselves, but based on who's saying it and what they intend by it. So if they say we want to use the military to start a coup, that's fine. They're protecting our democracy. If I say, hey, they're talking about using the military to foment a coup, they say you're an insane conspiracy theorist and a dangerous threat to our democracy. I don't see how, well, never, I'll stop there.
No, go ahead.
Fine.
All right. Well, I think one of the other big takeaways from Tuesday was that of the people that were maybe hoping for a big Biden landslide that are Republicans or former Republicans, it didn't come. So the reversion back to Paul Ryanism or something, I think we can hope, I think, that they might learn a lesson or two. So Chris, let's start with you. Do you think any lessons are going to be learned, or do you think the party's going to kind of actually assume Trumpism a little bit more into its point of view, especially on foreign policy?
Well, I mean, there's two scenarios here. One is that Trump wins, and one is that he loses. In the, I'll just say, God forbid, if President Trump loses, in that scenario, then there's a fight on our hands, right? And we still have the Lincoln Project, which raised something like $75 million, and is already scheduling meetings with key senators in order to brief them on why they lost and why they need to revert back to Bushism. You know, it's not for nothing that we should notice that it was Fox News that called Arizona very prematurely and has dug their heels in on that call on Tuesday night, which kind of gave this this sense of impending defeat to Trump. And I've already talked to sort of normal conservatives and people who do this, professionally, and that really sucked a lot of the energy out of people. Who was the last board member to join Fox News? It was Paul Ryan, right? So the Ryan, Bush, Crystal people still are very well financed and still occupy a lot of the high places. And so we still have the same dynamic going on where the base of the Republican Party, the people who vote, the people who volunteer, these are the people who support Donald Trump, but the people who occupy a lot of the commanding heights are still members of the bipartisan fusion party who are very happy to ally with the Bidens and the Harrises.
Although I will say something mildly hopeful, which is not my usual assigned role. I think Angelo Codevilla, who's written a lot about, he called the Cold Civil War, not a term he invented, but he's used, and many, many articles. I think he probably has it right, which is to say, that old Republican leadership is so disconnected from what has become the Republican base. Angelo calls it the country party, which is a bit imprecise, but it gets you some of the idea. It is much more rural, more voters, people in the heartland and the interiors, and much more tied to the old economy and so on, more downscale than the old Republican base. He says the country party found in Donald Trump a leader. It will seek and find, or it will either find or another leader, or that leader will find them. Putting them back together with the Chamber of Commerce Country Club Republicans as their leadership is not feasible. And Angelo has also said, in perhaps a less hopeful note, but I think a prophetic note, he says, whoever comes along and assumes the leadership of the country party is going to make Donald Trump look like a moderate, and people will long for the 2016 to 2020 period as one of relative calm in our politics. That's Angelo's prediction, not mine. I'm just putting it out there. But I just think, the reason I say hopeful is, I just think getting back to 2000, 2004 politics and policies is completely unviable given the structure of the party now and the mood of the base.
Well, it reminds me of a Politico story I saw a couple of weeks ago about how the Never Trumpers were looking to the GOP conference chair in the House, Liz Cheney, as kind of a way back into the party. And it's just really hard to see that being seen as legitimate by the base or acceptable. And do you think they might have a revolt on their hands?
Yeah, I do. If not a revolt, a kind, or if not that, then at least a sort of a strike of apathy, where people will just say, I don't care anymore. I'm not voting for this. You don't motivate me to vote for you, to donate to you, to canvass for you, to do anything for you, because you represent my views and interests in no discernible way. And to the extent that you seem to think about me at all, it's to insult me and view me and express contempt. So at a minimum, there will be that, I think, and just a kind of disengagement.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's a couple of possible forks here. I mean, one of them is that one of those forks, which I've been thinking a lot about, is that in the absence of that sort of charismatic leader, the role that Trump has filled, there is absolutely going to be a strike of apathy, unless maybe you have a particularly good congressman. Maybe you live in Paul Gosar's district or something and you love him, but he's still going to win by 25 anyway. Until that leader shows up, and that's, I think, totally unpredictable as to when or how that happens. Until that happens, you basically have one party rule, and there's a lot of destruction that can be wrought on this country. I mean, think about California. California's had one party rule for a long time, and I've told this story a couple times. I was driving from LA back to Phoenix about 2 months ago, and as soon as I got on the 101 leaving Hollywood, it was like Tijuana on a really bad day. I mean, there was literally a naked guy walking in the middle of the 101 who had not seen the inside of a shower this year. And that just seemed, there's shanties lining the 101 for miles out there. And, this is what one party rule does. And that is a not impossible outcome if Republican voters, for very understandable reasons, go on strike.
Now, shifting a little bit to some of the other kind of up-and-comers, maybe presidential prospects in 2024, it seems like a lot of the names that are being talked about that are probably not thought of all that favorably in this room have sort of tried to play a double game because they're not Trumpy about a lot of things, such as foreign policy. I'm thinking of people like Cotton and Rubio that now have a pretty tough choice to make. If it had been a landslide for Biden, they might have gone back to the kind of Bill Kristol mode of a Republican, but now they're not. So how do you think they're going to try to negotiate these things? And should we trust them when they say sort of realign or populist things? Chris, let's start with you for that one.
Well, so, can I quote Reagan here? Trust but verify. But I don't know how you verify with these people. And it's not Tom Cotton that worries me in particular. It's Nikki Haley. Right? I mean, Nikki Haley is Jeb Bush in a dress. And this is somebody who is, she's played the game, I think, as well as you probably can play it. She worked for Trump. She was in the administration. And then there's this horrific logic that people do privately, but not out loud, which is, hey, she's charismatic. By the way, did you know she's a woman and the daughter of immigrants? So we're totally going to pick up the immigrants and first generation vote just because of that. It's idiotic. Like, it's idpol for dumb people. It doesn't work. But Nikki Haley is a war hawk, and that is extremely concerning. And nonetheless, she will be one of the people I think is taken very seriously in 2024.
It's conceivable to me that the donor class and the party insiders could get Nikki Haley nominated, but I think she just gets slaughtered in a 2024 contest electorally.
I agree.
And in a popular vote, because Trump demonstrated in 2015-16 that the Republican Party, for I'm not going to say most of its history, but let's say from the Cold War, it was typically the more hawkish party. There were very few Democrats talking about rollback in the late 40s and early 50s, but that was a big faction of the Republican Party, and essentially the TAC non-interventionists got subsumed under the Vandenberg interventionists in the early Cold War. That held through the Reagan coalition. Republican Party had a big debate amongst itself at the end of the Cold War. What are we going to do? Do we keep liberal internationalism, going and expand its borders, or do we retrench? Retrench, obviously, most represented by Pat Buchanan, and the party at 9/11 essentially seemingly settled that debate. Oh, we have to be hawkish. So from that point on, from 9/11 till Trump shows up, the party, all of its officials, they thought they were just more hawkish as a matter of reflexiveness or nature, but also they thought it was a winning issue at the polls. And I think for a while it was. I think Bush being seen as tougher than Kerry in 2004 helped him win re-election. But what happened is the base changed underneath the leadership's feet, and they didn't realize it. And the base became much less hawkish than it had been, right? The further you get from 9/11, the further into ongoing disasters like Iraq and Afghanistan that seem to have no purpose and no strategy, the more the base got out of this mindset. And I don't see any sign that they're gotten back into it. I see signs that they're, to use the terminology of Walter Russell Mead, they remain Jacksonian. That is to say, they are quite committed to a quick, lethal use of force in the national interest, but they don't want to be mired in these kinds of things anymore. And if they try to nominate somebody like Nikki Haley, or Rubio's record on this, Rubio, I like what he's doing economically lately, but his foreign policy record will be hard to live down with the Republican base. It's out of touch with where they are now. I don't see how they win the 2024 election at all, given what's going on now. But let's say it's a clean, fair election. It seems to me to be a preposterous assumption, given what's going on now. Assume that it is. I still think either one of those two. I think Cotton has the same problem. He's way out. He's way out to the right or on the use of force, much more aggressive than the base is right now.
Now, this kind of brings us to a kind of debate I'd really like to air here, because I think the two of you are among the best people to make the case for the Trumpy side of this. I think being on the kind of pro-peace, anti-war side of the right, we're used to being in the wilderness, and for the first time, there was an opportunity to at least kind of get in the door and talk to some people. And I think the experience of being on the outside has made some people reluctant to even seize it, and that they've kind of, Trump has not done everything right on foreign policy, of course, but there's been a reluctance to even seize opportunities that I think are there. And so what advice would you give to a Dovish person about how to treat a second Trump administration if we get there? Michael, let's start with you.
Well, I mean, one thing is you have to understand. I honestly think so. Part of my criticism, I suppose, of the dovish right is number one. I think it's a little sometimes too dovish. I mean, this is my opinion, right? This is where I part company with people sometimes. I think sometimes Operation X or use of force Y or whatever is justified. Like I didn't have a problem with the Soleimani strike at all, and I know a lot of the dovish right was very upset about that. But also imprudently thought this is going to lead to a wider war with Iran. I got a lot of comments when that went down that day, people thinking, oh no, it's on. I said, guys, hold off. I think this could be a one-off. It's justified by X and Y and Z. I don't think the president really wants to get into a big tangle here. So I would ask the dovish right, I think, with all due respect, the dovish right needs to understand the base a little better too. It's not with you on this stuff entirely. It is, as I said, a requoting Mead, it's Jacksonian. It doesn't want to be involved in the affairs of other countries. It definitely doesn't want nation building. I mean, it's absolutely opposed to that. But it's also a very kind of profound sense of the national honor and the national interest, and it is willing to use force in certain circumstances that I think many of your editors and readers probably would disapprove of. I'm not asking you to change your opinion. I'm just asking you to understand where your base of support is coming from, so that I would say in the second term you're not going to have to worry, if there is one, you're not going to have to worry about the president getting any kind of long-term nation building conflict. I just don't see that as in the cards at all. In fact, I don't see him as starting any kind of war. However, I could see the country getting provoked or tested in a way that you guys say, this isn't that important, no need for any kind of response. And he judges it differently and says, no, I've got to do something. And his base agrees with him. And so I guess if I were you, I would use your influence not to denounce that kind of thing, but to try to inform it to make sure that things don't get out of hand, or that the people around him don't seize it as an opportunity to take it in a direction that his instincts tell him it shouldn't go.
Right. That rings true to me. Chris, did you want to weigh in on that one too?
Yeah, I do, because take the Soleimani strike as just an example, and I remain skeptical of the wisdom of that particular action, but I also was not terribly exercised about it one way or the other. Because of some of the points Michael was making, there are prudential reasons to even just for domestic politics, if we're going to be extremely frank about that, or to do strikes like that. I think the ship has sailed on nation building in particular. So I think what we really need to do is rethink how do we use our resources, both military, economic, et cetera, in the national interest. Like, what is the national interest? So when you think about the military, what's national security? It's literally security of the nation. How do we protect our borders? How do we protect the peace and prosperity of the American people? And so one of the places that leads me is not to say, well, let's not invade Iraq again, though that's true. It's maybe we should stop maybe we should stop the program of regime change in countries all around the world, right? I mean, I know that would put a lot of agencies out of business in Washington, but you look at, one of my sort of running jokes every time Mike Pompeo tweets something about some country doing the wrong thing is, how's the Juan Guaido presidency of Venezuela going? Because why? They've got somebody set up for just about every country where they want to replace the regime, but honestly, that's not in our interest, and it's none of our business. And that's a place where I think we need to really expend some energy and get the U.S. government out of the regime change business.
And lastly, the topic I wanted to get to was China. And I think one of the ways that some of these kind of up-and-coming GOP 24 perspectives have been playing this double game is that they want to look tough about China, but they don't really want to talk about making us economically independent. So they're very eager to deploy aircraft carriers, but they don't want to talk about bringing manufacturing back. How do you think that's going to be negotiated if Trump does in fact win, or if Biden wins? Chris, let's go back to you for that one.
Yeah, so, look, this is exactly right. And I know, there are several people I know you're talking about who say, let's deploy aircraft carriers. They just want to replay like the 70s and 80s. They want to replay the Cold War over again with China, but it's a totally different type of threat. China is an adversary, but they are not about to invade California, at least not using their divisions. They're just buying it, and they're doing it by impoverishing the middle and the working class of this country. So if you want to be tough on China, you don't build like 3 more carrier groups. You just erect 25% tariffs on everything that has any component that was made in China or that's owned by a Chinese company, right? Rebuild. The best way to stand up to China, if you want to frame it in that way, is just to rebuild the manufacturing base, to make the United States self-sufficient in manufacturing, in pharmaceuticals and energy, and food and all these different particular areas. That is how we actually wind up more prosperous, and we don't have to think about what China is doing. In particular, we just think about what we're doing.
And Michael?
Yeah, I do agree pretty much all of that. I would add, hey, why not also, in addition to tariffs, why not sharply limit their asset purchases inside the United States so that they don't control so much of our real estate economy, infrastructure, and things like that. Look, we have a problem, and it's hard to discuss, frankly. I guess because I'm out of government, it isn't so hard anymore. But which is we've got all these commitments in East Asia and China's front yard that we've made by a treaty. That the nice way to put this is that if the Chinese really wanted to test those commitments, it would be hard for us to meet them, right? Not only hard for us to meet them, the attempt to meet them might carry very disastrous consequences. Off the top of my, I do this to my students. I won't do it to you like I'm quizzing you. But the last time the United States lost a fleet carrier was May of 1942 in the Battle of Midway, right? The Chinese probably have the capability to sink one of these big Nimitz-class or Ford-class nuclear-powered carriers. Now, they do that, God knows where it goes. But what is all the flexing in the Taiwan Strait really about? Do we think? So we are obligated by law to come to the defense of Taiwan if it should come to that. But is that a conflict that we think we could actually win? 6,000 miles from our own shore, and I don't know how wide the strait is, but it's narrow in China's front yard. And is it a conflict that we think is ultimately, if it gets into a very large great power war, it would be the first in generations, that would redound to the national interest? The answers to those are probably no. So as we recalibrate our China policy, unfortunately, we're probably going to, I think, absolutely get as tough as we can domestically. That's what's really, really important. But kind of realize and walk a fine balance. Because we would lose. It would hurt us if we lost our alliance with Japan. It would hurt us if our friends and allies in East Asia stopped believing in us or trusting in us. But it would also hurt us, and potentially far more gravely, if we either provoked or stumbled into great power conflict with China that we either lost or won only at tremendous cost. And that's going to be a very difficult line for any president to walk. And we've seen the way that it has been walked prior to Trump, which is by essentially appeasement now, but I mean economic appeasement under the color of everybody wins because the Chinese economy develops, it gets rich, it will democratize, it will join the rules-based international order, and we won't, China's peaceful rise, we won't have to worry about it. That, the United States of America lost that bet that you could say it placed in 79 or 89 or whatever particular year you want to put on it. And I know what we do going forward is very much an open question, but it's not going to be, well, let me put it this way. I think a Biden administration is a big up for grabs, or a question. I think in his heart, Biden and the people around him and all the people, the oligarchs who run the Democratic Party would like to go right back to the status quo ante of maximum cooperation with China because they all get rich off of it, right? And they think it's the right thing to do, and they think, and so on. I think though the open question is, how much has Trump changed the conversation about China sufficiently so that it's now politically impossible for the Democrats to pretend that we're peaceful cooperators in an emerging global order, and they're going to have to maintain this toughness. I doubt, even if they conclude the latter, I doubt they'll be as tough as Trump would be in the second term. But it's at least possible that they'll be tougher than they would otherwise have been.
All right, I think that's about as much as we have time for. Thank you both so much for joining us.